In today's video, I'm going to go over the 3 dark horse teams that could win the Super Bowl. And no, I'm not talking about what everyone else is of, the Ravens are a dark horse team or the Lions are a dark horse team. No, those teams are way too good to be dark horse teams. So what I did was I looked at the odds to win the Super Bowl and I just knocked off the top 12. So if you think any of these teams will win the Super Bowl, I probably agree with you, but they just don't count for this list. But I have found 3 solid dark horse candidates to make the Super Bowl. The first one is the Minnesota Vikings. And if you remember back to last year, they went 13-4. They were a great team last year, sort of. They didn't win any games in the playoffs. They got beat by the Giants. It was pretty embarrassing. And they actually had a negative point differential even though they went 13-4. So, everyone everywhere thinks that the Vikings will have a worse record in the NFL, and I agree with them. They do have one very strong thing going for them, and that's their offense. They have Justin Jefferson, who is, it's a little debatable on the best wide receiver in the league, but if you don't have him as the top 3, then you're crazy. Justin Jefferson has had the most yards in the NFL through his first 3 seasons. And when you look at the most yards through the first 4 seasons, Justin Jefferson is ranked 6th, even though he's only played 3 so far. So he will blow past the record. And by the end of this year, Justin Jefferson could easily be 500 yards ahead of second place for most yards through the first 4 seasons. Then, of course, when talking about a team, you have to talk about the quarterback. So whether you like it or not, Kirk Cousins is good. He's not great, he's not bad, he's good. If he can just figure out how to win primetime games, they can actually go somewhere. And while Cousins is just a good quarterback, he has great weapons. I already mentioned Justin Jefferson, of course. He also has TJ Hawkinson, who is a top 5 tight end in the NFL. They drafted Jordan Addison, and they have a running back that is a little iffy, but he might be okay in Alexander Madison. He probably won't be as good as Cook was in previous years, but he's not bad. So why will the Vikings do better this year than they did last year? And the answer is pretty simple. So their offense needs to stay the same, or roughly the same, but their defense just has to get better. Last year, the Vikings defense was 30th in points allowed and 31st in yards allowed. They were quite literally one of the worst defenses in the NFL. But in response, even after going 13-4, they fired their defensive coordinator and they hired Brian Flores, who is very highly respected around the NFL. If he can bring this defense up to average, they're going to be a real threat. And of course, your odds to go to the Super Bowl are much, much higher when you're in the NFC instead of the AFC. The biggest threats to me are the Eagles or the Cowboys. I don't really think the 49ers are that good. I don't know, I just don't buy it. So I could be wrong, but to me the 2 biggest threats are the Eagles and the Cowboys versus in the AFC you have a loaded division with the Chiefs, the Bills, the Bengals, the Jets, the Ravens. And then when looking at the Vikings specific schedule, it's really not that bad. The Vikings have about the 10th easiest schedule in the NFL. Of course, going 13-4, they do have a first place schedule. So they do play the Eagles and the 49ers, and they got a bit unlucky, and they play the Chiefs. But what this means is, quite simply, they don't play the AFC North, which is awesome all around, and they also don't play the AFC East. So they don't play either of the 2 best divisions in the NFL. This should let the Vikings easily get to the playoffs, and as long as they can beat out the Lions for the division, they could even get first place, because the NFC East has a much tougher schedule. My second dark horse team to make the Super Bowl are the Cleveland Browns. So I know, they're the Browns. And also, I know they were bad last year. But looking at their team, there's a lot of talent, and they can put it together potentially, or it can all fall apart. This all comes down to Deshaun Watson. I know we all hate him, but, just speaking of football, he has a lot of upside. Last year, he gave us a bit of a Kenny Pickett experience with 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions through 6 games. So not very promising, but this is coming off of missing a year and a half of football, so maybe he was just rusty and can put it together this year. His training camp has been a bit shaky. I've heard of good practices and bad, but if he manages to put it together, he has Amari Cooper, who is a legitimate number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, not Justin Jefferson, but still one of the best wide receivers in the league. He also has David Njoku, a tight end, who's never quite put it together, but he's super athletic, and if the stars align, he can have a great year. And of course, you can't forget about probably their best player on offense, and that is Nick Chubb, the best running back in the NFL. Through his first 5 years in the NFL, he's averaged about 10 touchdowns per season, and every single year, he has had over 5 yards per carry. And if you don't know, 4 is seen as kind of the border mark for good or bad. Below 4, bad. Above 4, good. Above 5, great. And he's done that every single year. He is 28, but that's still within the prime of a running back's career. And then where I really like the Browns is their defense. More specifically, their defensive line. They have Myles Garrett, who's a top 3 or 4 pass rusher in the NFL. And this year, they've actually surrounded the line with more talent. And in training camp, they gave the Eagles' offensive line a lot of trouble. And the Eagles have the best offensive line in the league. So if the Browns can get some leads through scoring points quickly and then running the ball, I think Myles Garrett and the rest of the defense will just feast. They'll get a ton of sacks and they'll win a bunch of games. And then it also helps that they have the 6th easiest schedule in the NFL. In looking at their schedule, they avoid several major threats such as the Bills, the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Chargers. They miss out on a lot of these teams, and they have the advantage of a last place schedule. And you combine that with the advantage of playing the AFC South, and they have the chance to get a bunch of easy wins. Now the downside is they're in the AFC. So even if they're great, one, they're not going to win their division probably, or they'll have a tough time because of the Bengals looking great, the Ravens looking great, the Steelers have a lot of promise. So in my opinion, it's the most loaded division in the NFL. So I don't think they're going to win it. I think if they win everything, they get hot at the end of the year, they'd go into the playoffs as a wild card team, make some surprises, maybe play against some teams with injured quarterbacks, and they could win it all. And if you've made it this far in the video, please consider liking and subscribing. And then my third and final dark horse team to make the Super Bowl is the Seattle Seahawks. So going back to last year, we all thought they were going to be terrible. They ended up decent. They were 9-8, they made the playoffs as a wild card team, and then they lost. But the real surprising thing is that Geno Smith looked much better than he ever has in his entire career. Going into the year, we didn't even think he would start, so being a top 10 quarterback, huge improvement. Of course, it helped to have 2 great wide receivers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And then going into this year, they have potentially the best 3 wide receivers in the NFL with the addition of Jackson Smith-Njigba. And if you haven't heard of him, he's a rookie from Ohio State. And Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave said he was the best wide receiver when they played there. And they are now Pro Bowlers in the NFL. So he has a ton of promise. He is injured going into the season, but he should start before too soon. And they also have Kenny Walker, so they have a very potent offense. And their defense is not great, but it is better than teams like the Vikings. And they have several promising young players such as Tyreek Woolen, or I don't know how to say his name, that's probably close, who is a great young cornerback who in his rookie season had 6 interceptions, which was tied for leading the league. They also brought several important players back to the defense, such as Bobby Wagner. And looking at their schedule, they don't play the Chiefs or the AFC East, so that is a huge upside. Unfortunately, they do play the AFC North, and they do play the 49ers, which are really the huge question mark in their schedule and their season. If the 49ers are bad, the Seahawks have an easy walk to the number 1 seed in the NFC. If the 49ers are good, then they don't. But they get the advantage of playing the Cardinals twice a year, the worst team in the NFL. And they also play the Rams, who could easily be a bottom 5 team in the NFL with Cooper Kupp hurt. And if I wanted a really crazy throw in the dart pick, I guess I would pick the Bears as someone who's very unlikely to win, but I guess technically could. And I picked them because Justin Fields, if he has a Jalen Hurts-like improvement, who knows what could happen. But I'm not including them in my top 3 because their overall roster is terrible. And thanks for watching my video. Leave a comment below on your thoughts, leave a like, and subscribe.